The autumn wind carried the scent of dying chrysanthemums through the ornate windows of Gyeongbok Palace, where King Lee Jihan stood motionless before a silk screen painted with soaring cranes. At 23, his shoulders bore the weight of a kingdom, yet tonight they trembled with something far more devastating than royal responsibility, the knowledge that his heart had become a weapon against the woman he loved most. 3 months had passed since he'd made the impossible choice, banishing himself from her presence to protect her from the venomous court politics that threatened to destroy anyone who dared love a king. The red silk mask covering the upper half of his face concealed features that had grown gaunt with sleepless nights, though his dark eyes, visible through carefully cut openings, burned with an intensity that made even his most trusted advisors step back in reverence and fear. His extra-long black hair, once meticulously maintained, now fell in disheveled waves past his shoulders, a physical manifestation of his internal chaos. The elegant hanbok he wore, deep midnight blue with silver threading, hung loose on his frame, evidence of meals forgotten and duties performed through sheer force of will rather than genuine engagement. "Your Majesty," came a trembling voice from behind the carved wooden doors. "Court Maid Soo-jin requests urgent audience." Jihan's jaw tightened beneath his mask. Soo-jin had served in the palace for 15 years, her loyalty unquestionable, her discretion absolute. If she sought him at this hour, when the moon hung like a pearl against black silk, something was terribly wrong. "Enter," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of generations of kings, though his hands betrayed him with their slight tremor. The doors slid open with whispered precision, and Soo-jin stepped forward, her usually composed demeanor shattered. Tears streaked her weathered face as she dropped to her knees in the traditional deep bow, her gray hanbok pooling around her like storm clouds. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice cracking with emotion, "I come to you not as your servant, but as someone who has watched love bloom and wither within these walls. I beg you, come home to her now. She's destroying herself." The words hit Jihan like physical blows. His breath caught, and for a moment the carefully constructed walls around his heart crumbled. "Rise, Soo-jin," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Speak plainly." The elderly maid struggled to her feet, her hands shaking as she wiped her tears. "Lady Minji, Your Majesty, she hasn't eaten properly in weeks. She tends her herb garden from dawn until her hands bleed, then sits by the lotus pond until midnight, staring at the moon as if it might bring you back to her. Yesterday, I found her collapsed among the medicinal plants, clutching a letter she's written to you every day but never sends." Jihan's composure finally shattered. He turned away, pressing his palms against the cool silk screen, his breathing ragged. Behind his mask, tears he'd forbidden himself to shed for months finally broke free. "She doesn't understand," he said, his voice thick with anguish. "The court nobles grow more restless each day. They whisper that a king who loves a common herb gardener is unfit to rule. They speak of rebellion, of finding a more suitable ruler. If I return to her, they'll use her against me, or worse, they'll eliminate her entirely." "Your Majesty," Soo-jin said softly, stepping closer with the familiarity of someone who had helped raise him. "With respect, you're killing her just as surely as any assassin's blade. Love without presence is just beautiful torture." Meanwhile, in the secluded eastern gardens of the palace complex, Minji knelt among rows of medicinal herbs, her delicate hands working mechanically to harvest evening primrose under the silver moonlight. At 18, she possessed a luminous beauty that seemed to glow from within. Skin like polished jade, expressive dark eyes that held depths of wisdom beyond her years, and long black hair that she now wore in a simple braid rather than the elaborate styles Jihan had once loved to see, adorned with tiny white flowers. Her simple cream-colored hanbok, practical for garden work, was stained with earth and tears. She'd grown thinner in the months since Jihan had withdrawn from her life without explanation, her delicate frame now almost ethereal in its fragility. The herb garden had become her sanctuary and her prison. Here, surrounded by the plants she'd learned to cultivate under her grandmother's guidance, she felt closest to the woman she'd been, before she'd fallen impossibly in love with a king. Yet every root she tended, Every leaf she harvested reminded her of the healing teas she'd once prepared for Jihan when the weight of the crown gave him headaches that lasted for days. "Why did you leave me?" she whispered to the night air, her voice breaking on the words she'd spoken 1,000 times to the uncaring darkness. Was our love so easily discarded? She pulled another plant from the earth with unnecessary force, dirt scattering across her skirt. The physical pain in her hands was welcome. It distracted from the constant ache in her chest that had become her unwelcome companion. From the shadows of a nearby pavilion, Sujin watched with a breaking heart before departing for her desperate mission to the king. She'd seen palace romances bloom and die, but never had she witnessed such pure, devastating love destroying two souls who belonged together. Minji continued her midnight gardening, unaware that her fate was about to change forever. In her simple cloth pouch lay the latest letter she'd written to Jihan, pages filled with her confusion, her love, her growing despair. Like all the others, she'd planned to burn it with the dawn, unable to bridge the impossible gap between a common girl and the king who had once promised her that love could conquer any obstacle. The autumn wind picked up, scattering fallen leaves across the garden like nature's own tears. In the distance, the palace bells chimed midnight, their bronze voices carrying across courtyards where love had become a casualty of duty and fear. Back in his private chambers, Jihan dismissed Sujin with a heavy heart and trembling hands. Alone once more, he moved to his writing desk, where dozens of unsent letters lay in neat piles, his own desperate attempts to explain the unexplainable, to justify the unjustifiable. He picked up his brush, dipped it in ink, and began to write once more. My beloved Minji, if you could see into my heart, you would find it has become a wasteland without your laughter to bring it spring. Every decision I make as king is measured against the cost to your safety. Every breath I take is borrowed time until I can find a way to love you without destroying you. The brush trembled in his grip, leaving an ink blot that spread across the rice paper like a wound. With a sound of anguish, he crumpled the letter and added it to the growing pile of failures on the floor. Rising abruptly, he moved to the window that faced the eastern gardens. Though he couldn't see Minji from this distance, he knew she was there. Sujin had told him of her nightly vigils among the herbs. The knowledge that she was suffering because of his protection felt like a sword through his chest. Forgive me, he whispered to the night, his breath fogging the glass. Forgive me for loving you so much that I'm willing to break both our hearts to keep you alive. As the first pale light of dawn crept across the palace grounds, Minji finally rose from her garden, her knees stiff from hours of kneeling, her hands raw and bleeding from her desperate work. She gathered her meager harvest and turned toward the servants' quarters, where she would prepare the morning's medicinal teas for the palace inhabitants who had grown to depend on her skills. But as she rounded the corner of the moon viewing pavilion, she froze. There, standing like a figure from a dream, was Jihan. His mask caught the early light, and his dark eyes, those eyes she'd memorized in 1,000 stolen moments, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart stop. Minji, he said, her name falling from his lips like a prayer and a confession. She dropped her basket, herbs scattering across the stone path like fallen stars. Your Majesty, she whispered, the formal address feeling like poison on her tongue when all she wanted was to run to him, to demand answers, to lose herself in his arms until the world made sense again. They stood frozen, separated by mere feet that might as well have been an ocean. The morning air was crisp with autumn's promise of winter, and somewhere in the distance, a temple bell rang the hour, a reminder that time continued its relentless march even when hearts stood still. I've come to... Jihan began, then stopped, his carefully prepared words crumbling in the face of her beauty, her pain, her unwavering love that shone in her eyes despite everything he'd put her through. You've come to what? Minji asked, her voice gaining strength as anger began to mix with her heartbreak. To explain why you vanished from my life like morning mist? To tell me why the man who once promised me that love could move mountains suddenly decided I wasn't worth fighting for? Her words hit him like physical blows, each one deserved, each one breaking his heart anew. Minji, please, no, she said, stepping forward, her delicate hands clenched into fists. You don't get to please me. You don't get to appear like a ghost and expect forgiveness without explanation. Do you know what these months have been like? Do you care? The tears she'd held back for so long finally spilled over, and Jihan's careful control shattered completely. In 3 swift strides, he closed the distance between them, his hands reaching for her face before he caught himself, remembering all the reasons he'd stayed away. I care so much it's killing me, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I care so much that I've been willing to destroy myself to keep you safe. The court nobles, Minji, they're planning rebellion. They say a king who loves beneath his station is unfit to rule. If they succeed, you'll be the first casualty of their ambition. Minji stared at him, her tears still falling, but now understanding began to dawn in her expressive eyes. So you decided to sacrifice our love to protect me, without asking what I wanted, without giving me a choice. What choice could I give you? Jihan asked desperately. Death or heartbreak? Those were the only options I could see. You could have chosen trust, she said softly, her anger giving way to the deep sadness that had become her constant companion. You could have chosen to believe that love, real love, is stronger than fear. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the garden path where 2 hearts hung in the balance. Palace life continued around them, servants hurrying to their duties, guards changing shifts, the eternal rhythm of royal routine. But in this moment, the world had narrowed to just the 2 of them, and the chasm of misunderstanding that had grown between them. I've been writing to you, Minji said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Every day. Letters I never send because, what's the point of pouring your heart out to someone who's already decided you're not worth the risk? Jihan's breath caught. I've been writing to you too, he admitted. Hundreds of letters, trying to explain, trying to find words that could make you understand without making you hate me. They stood in silence, the weight of all those unspoken words hanging between them like a bridge neither had dared to cross. Show me, Minji said suddenly, her decision surprising even herself. Show me these letters. Let me read what you couldn't say to my face. Jihan hesitated, knowing that his letters contained not just explanations, but confessions of love so raw, so desperate, that they would either heal the rift between them or destroy them both completely. And you'll show me yours? He asked, his voice vulnerable in a way that reminded her of the man she'd fallen in love with. Not the king, but the person beneath the crown who had once shared his deepest fears and dreams with her in whispered conversations under starlit skies. Minji nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and hope. All of them, every word I've been too afraid to send. An hour later, they sat in the secluded tea meditation pavilion, a small structure nestled among bamboo groves where the sound of wind through leaves provided natural privacy. The pavilion was simple but elegant, with low wooden tables and silk cushions, paper screens that filtered the morning light into gentle patterns across the floor. Between them lay 2 stacks of letters, his bound with red silk ribbon, hers tied with simple hemp cord. The contrast seemed to symbolize everything that had driven them apart, his royal obligations and her humble origins. You first, Minji said, her hands trembling as she reached for his letters. Jihan watched with barely contained anxiety as she unfolded the first page, dated just 3 days after he'd stopped visiting her garden. His handwriting, usually precise and controlled, was shaky with emotion. My dearest Minji, today I learned that Lord Park has been gathering support among the noble families, claiming that my infatuation with a common gardener proves I'm unfit to rule. He speaks of finding a more suitable king, one who understands the proper order of things. I cannot risk your life for my happiness, no matter how desperately I want to. If loving you means putting you in danger, then I must find the strength to love you from a distance. Forgive me for being too weak to say this to your face. Tears fell onto the paper as Minji read, smudging the ink slightly. She looked up at Jihan, seeing him clearly for the first time in months, not as the king who had abandoned her, but as the man who had been carrying an impossible burden alone. "Your turn," she said softly, gesturing to her own letters. With hands that shook despite his royal training in composure, Jihan opened her first letter, dated the same day as his. "My beloved Jihan, I don't understand why you won't see me, why your guards turn me away when I try to visit. Have I done something wrong? Have I misunderstood what we meant to each other? I keep replaying our last conversation, searching for clues I might have missed. You told me you loved me. You said that together we could face anything. Was I foolish to believe you? I'm trying to be strong, but I feel like I'm drowning in questions with no answers." Jihan's composure cracked completely. A sob escaped his lips as he pressed the letter to his chest, finally understanding the full scope of the pain he'd caused in his misguided attempt at protection. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I thought I was saving you, but I was just a coward who couldn't bear to watch you suffer for loving me." Minji set down his letters and moved around the low table, kneeling beside him. For the first time in months, she reached out and touched his face, her fingers gentle against the silk of his mask. "Take it off," she said softly. "Please, I need to see all of you." With trembling hands, Jihan untied the silk cords that held his mask in place. As it fell away, Minji gasped. His face, once full and healthy, was gaunt with suffering. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his skin had the pale cast of someone who'd forgotten how to sleep peacefully. "You've been destroying yourself too," she realized, her heart breaking anew at the evidence of his pain. "How could I not?" he asked, leaning into her touch like a man dying of thirst finally offered water. "Every day without you has been a kind of death. I convinced myself I was being noble, but I was just afraid of fighting for us, afraid of risking everything for love." They spent the morning reading through months of unspoken longing, each letter a window into hearts that had been breaking in parallel. By the time the sun reached its zenith, they sat surrounded by scattered papers, their faces streaked with tears, their souls finally laid bare. "What do we do now?" Minji asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "The threats you wrote about, they're still real. The nobles who oppose us haven't simply disappeared." Jihan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the bamboo grove where golden light filtered through green leaves. When he spoke, his voice carried a new resolve, a strength that came not from royal training, but from finally choosing love over fear. "We fight," he said simply. "Together. The way we should have from the beginning." "And if we lose?" Minji asked, though her eyes already held the answer. "Then we lose together," Jihan replied, taking her hands in his. "I'd rather face any danger with you by my side than live safely without you. These months have taught me that a life without love isn't life at all. It's just existence." Minji felt something shift inside her chest, like ice finally melting after a long winter. "The court will never accept me as queen," she said, but her tone held challenge rather than defeat. "Then we'll change the court," Jihan said with the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in months. "Or we'll find a way to rule that doesn't depend on their acceptance. My ancestors built this kingdom on strength and wisdom, not on the approval of nobles who care more about bloodlines than the good of the people." "You're talking about revolution," Minji said, but her eyes sparkled with something that might have been excitement. "I'm talking about evolution," Jihan corrected. "A kingdom where love and merit matter more than birth and tradition. A place where a king can choose his queen based on the content of her heart, rather than the status of her family." As afternoon shadows lengthened across the pavilion, they began to plan their future with the careful strategy of generals preparing for war. But this would be a war fought with wisdom rather than weapons, with love as their banner and truth as their shield. "Sujin mentioned that you've been writing letters every day," Jihan said, an idea beginning to form. "What if we used that? What if we documented our story? Not just our love, but our vision for the kingdom. Let the people decide if they want a king who rules with his heart, as well as his head." Minji's eyes widened with understanding. "A record of our correspondence shared with the people, It would be unprecedented. Everything about us is unprecedented, Jihan pointed out with a wry smile. We might as well embrace it. They spent the rest of the afternoon crafting a new kind of letter. Not private confessions of love, but a public declaration of their intentions. They wrote of a kingdom where wisdom mattered more than bloodline, where the queen could be chosen for her character rather than her connections, where love could be a source of strength rather than weakness. We'll need allies, Minji said as they worked. People who believe in change, who are tired of the old ways. I know several young nobles who've expressed frustration with the current system, Jihan mused. And there are merchants and scholars who've been quietly advocating for reform. Perhaps it's time to stop being quiet. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they had the foundation of a plan that was audacious in its simplicity. They would trust the people of the kingdom to choose love over tradition, progress over stagnation. Are you afraid? Minji asked as they prepared to leave the pavilion. Terrified, Jihan admitted with a laugh that held more joy than she'd heard from him in months. But for the first time in my life, I'm more afraid of not trying than I am of failing. That evening, as palace servants lit the red lanterns that would guide the night shift through their duties, Jihan made his first move. He called for an assembly of the royal council, but instead of meeting in the formal throne room, he chose the Garden of Contemplation, an outdoor space where cherry trees created a natural amphitheater under the stars. The council members arrived in various states of confusion and concern. Lord Park, the leader of the opposition faction, wore his displeasure openly, while younger nobles like Lord Kim and Lady Yoon seemed intrigued by the unusual setting. Honored council members, Jihan began, standing without his usual throne or elevated platform. I've called you here tonight to discuss the future of our kingdom. But before we talk about policy or politics, I want to share something with you. A story of love, duty, and the choice between fear and courage. He gestured and Minji stepped from the shadows where she'd been waiting. Several council members gasped. Her presence at such a gathering was unprecedented. She wore a simple but elegant hanbok of deep blue silk, her hair adorned with small white flowers that caught the lantern light like stars. Some of you know Lady Minji as the palace herb gardener, Jihan continued, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. I know her as the woman who taught me that true strength comes not from commanding others, but from having the courage to be vulnerable, to admit when you're wrong, and to choose love even when it's difficult. Lord Park stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. The council is no place for... For what? Jihan interrupted, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. For honesty? For admitting that a king is also a man with a heart that can love and break like any other? I've spent months trying to protect this woman by staying away from her, and in doing so, I nearly destroyed us both. I won't make that mistake again. He turned to face the full assembly, his mask discarded, his face open and vulnerable in the lantern light. I love Minji. I intend to make her my queen. If that troubles you, then we have much to discuss about the kind of kingdom we want to build together. The silence that followed Jihan's declaration was deafening. Even the night insects seemed to pause their chorus as the weight of his words settled over the assembly. Finally, Lord Park found his voice. Your Majesty, he said, his tone carefully controlled but seething with barely contained fury. You speak of love as if it were a qualification for rulership. A king's duty is to the kingdom, not to his personal desires. Marriage is a political alliance, not a romantic fantasy. And look where that thinking has brought us, Jihan replied calmly. A court full of political marriages that produce heirs but no happiness. Alliances that serve individual families rather than the greater good. When did we decide that a king's heart was a liability rather than an asset? Lady Yoon, one of the younger council members, stepped forward. Your Majesty, if I may, what you propose would require significant changes to our laws and traditions. Are you prepared for that level of upheaval? I'm prepared for whatever it takes to build a kingdom worthy of its people, Jihan answered. Minji has taught me that wisdom can come from the humblest origins, that strength can be found in gentleness, that a ruler's greatest power lies in their ability to inspire rather than intimidate. Minji, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke. Her voice was soft but carried clearly in the night air. Honored council members, I understand your concerns. I am not of noble birth. I have no political connections or family wealth to offer. But I have something else, a deep love for this kingdom and its people, and a commitment to helping our king rule with both wisdom and compassion. She paused, looking each council member in the eye. I've spent my life tending plants, helping them grow strong and healthy. I believe I can help this kingdom grow in the same way, with patience, care, and the understanding that the strongest roots often come from the humblest soil. Lord Kim, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. Your Majesty, Lady Minji, your words are inspiring, but Lord Park raises valid concerns about tradition and stability. How do you propose to address the inevitable resistance to such changes? Jihan and Minji exchanged a look, and she nodded encouragingly. This was the moment they had prepared for, the chance to share their vision for a different kind of kingdom. We propose a gradual transformation, Jihan began, starting with transparency. For too long, the royal court has been shrouded in secrecy and tradition that serves the few rather than the many. We want to open the palace to the people, to let them see their rulers as human beings who share their struggles and dreams. Minji stepped forward, her confidence growing with each word. We envision a court where merit matters more than bloodline, where the queen's role extends beyond producing heirs to actually serving the people. I want to establish healing centers throughout the kingdom, places where the knowledge I've gained from tending herbs can be shared with those who need it most. You're talking about revolution, Lord Park said, his voice tight with alarm. We're talking about evolution, Jihan corrected, echoing the words he'd shared with Minji earlier. The kingdom our ancestors built was revolutionary for its time. They chose progress over tradition, strength over comfort. We're simply continuing that legacy. Lady Yoon looked thoughtful. And if the people reject these changes, if they prefer the old ways, then we'll listen to them, Minji said simply. True leadership means serving the people's needs, not imposing our will upon them. But we believe that when people are given the choice between fear and love, between division and unity, they'll choose the path that leads to a better future for their children. The discussion continued late into the night, with council members raising concerns, asking questions, and gradually beginning to envision the possibilities that Jihan and Minji described. Not all were convinced. Lord Park and several older nobles remained firmly opposed, but seeds of change had been planted. As the first light of dawn crept across the palace grounds, the council meeting finally concluded with an agreement to present the proposal to the full court within a week. It wasn't the immediate acceptance Jihan had hoped for, but it was a beginning. Walking back through the gardens as the palace awakened around them, Jihan and Minji felt the weight of what they'd set in motion. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and opposition, but they would face it together. Do you regret it? Jihan asked as they paused by the lotus pond where Minji had spent so many lonely nights. Once this becomes public, there will be no going back to the simple life you knew. Minji looked at him, this man who had chosen to risk everything for love, and felt her heart swell with a certainty that surprised her with its strength. The simple life was never really simple once I fell in love with you, she said. I've been living in limbo for months, neither fully in your world nor completely in my own. At least now we're moving forward instead of standing still. Jihan reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers as the morning sun painted the sky in shades of hope. Whatever comes next, we face it together? Together, Minji agreed, and for the first time in months, the word felt like a promise rather than a dream. As they stood by the lotus pond, watching the flowers open to greet the new day, palace servants began their morning routines around them. Some stared in surprise at the sight of their king and the herb gardener standing hand in hand, but others smiled, as if they'd been waiting for this moment of honesty and hope. The kingdom was about to change, and love, patient, persistent, and ultimately triumphant, would be the catalyst for that transformation. In the distance, temple bells rang the hour, their bronze voices carrying across courtyards where tradition and progress would soon meet in a dance as old as time itself. The story of King Lee Jihan and Minji was just beginning, but already it carried the promise of a love strong enough to reshape a kingdom and wise enough to honor both the past and the future. In choosing each other, they had chosen to believe that the greatest revolutions begin not with swords or declarations, but with two hearts brave enough to love without conditions or reservations. And in the herb garden where their love had first bloomed, new plants were already beginning to grow, their roots deep and strong, reaching toward a sun that promised to shine on a kingdom transformed by the simple, revolutionary power of authentic love. The end. This story explores themes of love transcending social barriers, the courage required to challenge tradition, and the transformative power of authentic emotional connection. Set against the backdrop of a Korean royal court, it weaves together romance, political intrigue, and the timeless struggle between duty and desire, ultimately affirming that true love, when combined with wisdom and courage, can indeed change the world.